Yeah, let's just get into it. Don't want to waste too much time. So is my volume good now? You can hear me better? All right, sweet. So first thing I want to talk about, something big's happening next week. The Nakamoto upgrade is finally happening. It's been in the works for a long time. This is a pretty remarkable achievement. Tell us a little bit about, the path to get here. What have been the challenges? What have been uh, great success stories of this? Yeah.
Yes. I think for people who are not familiar with the Nakamoto upgrade, it's basically the first version of Stacks went live in early 2021, and we are Bitcoiners, we're Bitcoin builders, and the system that we built really optimized for security, and the L2 would sort of like produce a block when Bitcoin would produce a block, and that's like every 10 to 40 minutes, right? And also focusing on decentralization like Bitcoin, just like, you can run a Bitcoin node on a Raspberry Pi, you could run a Stacks node on a Raspberry Pi as well. But these are trade-offs in the sense that if your node is small enough that it can run on a Raspberry Pi, or your L2 is only producing blocks when a Bitcoin block comes, that means that you're sort of like not optimizing for speed, and you're not optimizing for having, a lot of throughput in your network because your nodes are, sort of like very light and they can run on a Raspberry Pis. So those were sort of like the hard lessons that we learned from the first version that went live in 2021, that compared to the UX people were seeing on a Solana or Ethereum, people were getting used to like much faster blocks, much higher throughput. And that's what we wanted to bring to Bitcoin. And I think that's been the work of Nakamoto, where we are sort of like cracking this long-standing problem that you want to have 100% of Bitcoin security. You want things to be very secure, but you also want them to be fast as well. So that's what Nakamoto does, that it has really fast consensus in between Bitcoin blocks. So the L2 will produce blocks faster, but as soon as a Bitcoin block comes, now you would follow like 100% of Bitcoin security. I think a lot of people forget like how much Bitcoin hash power is out there, and it's really not being used for anything other than securing the Bitcoin L1. And I think with the work with Stacks, what we're saying is if you are launching other L2s or other systems, it can tap into the same hash power network that Bitcoin has and use 100% of that for securing these L2s as well. And that's, I think, very unique and something very new that's happening in the industry now.
Yeah. So what I would add on to that is that, really the vision for Stacks was to unlock additional functionality for Bitcoin. So more scalability and more expressive smart contracts without requiring any changes to Bitcoin itself. And so we've started the Nakamoto upgrade around 12 to 18 months ago, and it's really been like changing the engine of a car while it's moving, 90 degrees down the highway, right? This is a fundamental upgrade to the way that the Stacks network operates in order to achieve better performance and better security that is more aligned with the Bitcoin L1. So post Nakamoto, we will receive an performance improvement of roughly 25 to 50x what the current Stacks block times are. So it'll be an order of magnitude improvement in terms of the user experience and being able to interact with Bitcoin on layer 2. And it also comes with the ability to have Bitcoin level finality. What we mean by that is, finality is really the point at which you can no longer reverse a transaction. And so on the Stacks network, it will be as difficult to reverse or reorg a transaction as it is on the Bitcoin L2. So being able to balance increased programmability and functionality while still inheriting the underlying security of the L1, that was the ultimate design goal that we had for Stacks. And we're finally coming up close to the activation. Sweet. So what are some of the use cases that can be enabled on Stacks by this upgrade? Is there anything in particular that you're excited about with this?
Yeah, I think there are a bunch of these, but let me first go over like a base level use case, which is just imagine like Bitcoin payments. Uh, People who've been around in the industry for a while, they would notice that in the early days, there was a lot of focus on like trying to make Bitcoin payments easy and trying to make them fast or cheap. The Lightning Network project is all about that, but we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it happen like really. Most people who now enter crypto, they very quickly go to Ethereum or Solana or somewhere else, and that's where they're experiencing most of their daily transactions. People aren't transacting with Bitcoin because the UX is so bad or you know, the software isn't there. We don't have Bitcoin wallets and so on. So I think one of the first things you notice is that it solves that long-standing problem of can we actually do fast, cheap BTC payments, because that will happen on an L2. That's not going to happen on the L1 because Bitcoin is not going to change. And the next big thing, and I'll let Andre talk about it more, is like Bitcoin is more than $1 trillion in capital, and you'll start seeing that being deployed in DeFi, which is, again, an obvious thing that people are not going to just leave that capital sitting there while DeFi is happening on much smaller networks. People are going to take BTC and going to start deploying it into DeFi. I think that's a massive unlock that's happening with Nakamoto and SBDC.
Yeah, so just to build on that, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can unlock in terms of Bitcoin programmability. So the two biggest use cases I think that we can really start to activate are Bitcoin trading and Bitcoin lending, right? So as of today, there isn't really a great way to swap for Bitcoin to a stablecoin in a decentralized way without going through some sort of centralized intermediary. And the same thing for lending, right? We speak to a lot of Bitcoiners, and what they want to do with their Bitcoin is pretty consistent, right? They want to borrow against it so that they can either access leverage or they can purchase real assets without going through a taxable event. And so providing easy ways to do this on chain, again, without going through a central intermediary so that it's permissionless, is really, I think, a lot of the big unlock is going to be, especially in the early days.
Awesome. Kind of building off that, after Nakamoto, the next big roadmap item is SBTC. A good decentralized version of Bitcoin, off Bitcoin, that you can, use on the layer 2s or other ecosystems is kind of been a tough nut to crack. How is Stacks going to solve this issue? And I guess we can give a little bit of a technical background of that, and then maybe we could talk about why that's important.
Yes. So I think due to various reasons, right? Like Bitcoin is durable and simple, and it's I actually view that as almost like cold storage or settlement layer, right? If BlackRock is buying Bitcoin for their ETF, they're just going to put it in cold storage on the L1. Whereas if normal people want to deploy Bitcoin capital in smart contracts and they want to trade NFTs against it or use BTC on chain, like that's going to be on the L2s, right? And for Stacks, moving your Bitcoin from the L1 to L2 is what we call SBDC, right? So just like, you have your Bitcoin on Coinbase is, basically Bitcoin on Coinbase, or so your Bitcoin on the L2 is not L1 Bitcoin, but that's what we call L2 Bitcoin is SBDC. So the security of that is extremely important, right? So for us, when we were starting to build that, we wanted it to be fully decentralized. We wanted it to be fully permissionless and open. So anyone can become a part of the system to move the BTC from L1 to L2 and then back, right? So the hard problem is actually coming back because Bitcoin, it doesn't understand L2s, right? Like it has no idea that there's an L2 running. And that's where the trust assumptions come in. So we have sort of like designed this network where it's open source, it's fully open and permissionless. Anyone can participate and become a signer. So you lock STX Capital to become a signer on the network, right? So you're validating the blocks, the L2 blocks, but you're also signing any Bitcoin withdrawals that are happening from the L2 back to the L1. So that's the trust assumption, that it's an open network of validators. And over the last couple of months, like more than 20 institutions signed up, right? So it's not just the capital lot, which is like roughly $1 billion, but it's actually the reputation of all these institutions who are becoming signers for SBDC as well, which I think is very important. It's sort of like the most pragmatic commercial solution you can have today. And then I think there are other approaches like BitVM and others that can even reduce those trust assumptions further down the road, but they're at R&D stages right now, right? So we want to ship the most decentralized secure network we can today, and then continue the R&D work that might even reduce these trust assumptions in the future.
Yeah. So just to build on that, right? So SBDC is a way to move Bitcoin into DeFi via the Stacks blockchain. It's backed 1-to-1 against BTC. And really the way that it works more under the hood is that a user would send Bitcoin to the SBDC protocol. And SBDC signers are essentially running a version of a Bitcoin node and a Stacks node. So they have visibility into Bitcoin state, so they can see that that transaction occurred. Once that transaction happens, those SBDC signers would mint SBTC on a one-to-one basis on the Stacks network. And then from there, you have access to fully expressive smart contracts. Stacks is an account-based model similar to what you're used to in other DeFi ecosystems, where you can program your Bitcoin and actually use it in smart contracts and decentralized applications. And the key here is that it's not secured by like one central custodian. So the key design behind this is that we're eliminating central point of failure in the Bitcoin design, in the Bitcoin bridge design. Instead, it's secured by this decentralized network of validators that are, institutional operators that are maintaining the Bitcoin that is in the Peg wallet. So really doing this in a way that is more decentralized, removes central point of failure, and tries to take that sort of different approach to it.
How do you see SBTC, its roadmap in developing in terms of other ecosystems? I've seen that there's been announcements over with Stacks that you guys are going to bring this not just on Stacks, but other networks like Solana, like Aptos as well. What are the synergies for that?
Yeah, so I think if you think about working with Bitcoin is actually pretty hard and clunky to work with, right? Like Bitcoin script is pretty limited. There aren't a lot of dev tools available. And this is something that the Stacks ecosystem sort of specializes in, right? Like we've been Bitcoin builders for years. We understand how to sort of work with Bitcoin and understand all of the security trade-offs and so on. So if Stacks really specializes on building sort of the best way to make Bitcoin programmable, then other ecosystems can sort of piggyback on that work. Like they don't need to do that work themselves. If the most secure decentralized signer network is already bringing Bitcoin to a more programmable environment, which is the L2, they can actually just bridge from there and take BTC to their ecosystem, so which is way more efficient and faster for them instead of trying to figure out everything that we have figured out over the last year. So I think that's what you're seeing with the work that we made an announcement with the Aptos Foundation. There's ongoing work going on to try and bring this to Solana as well. And if you're wondering why those ecosystems, I think this is just my personal take. I see a lot of developer momentum on those ecosystems, right? They're new stacks in terms of technology stacks, and they're not EVM, right? I do view EVM as sort of a old clunky technology at this point. And there's already Bitcoin available on Ethereum. WBTC might be centralized, but there's $10 billion of BTC already available in Ethereum that can participate in ETH DeFi. Or as these upcoming rising ecosystems, they don't have good, Bitcoin assets there at all, which is something that, SBTC could help with. So I think that was one of the reasons why you saw some collaborations with the Aptos Foundation and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that I would add there is that, we really see SBTC as being able to power all of DeFi. And if we can help to create this sort of hub of Bitcoin liquidity, that can only help to attract more developers, more capital to come into the ecosystem, which, even further supports applications on the Stacks network. So, we see expanding into ecosystems like Solana and Aptos as a really important distribution channel for basically connecting Stacks into the broader DeFi ecosystem and becoming this hub for Bitcoin liquidity.
Awesome. So we did have a presentation. We're going to kind of piece it through. It's kind of a good segue to the next question I wanted to ask. But, yep. So how I think if we had this talk maybe 2 years ago, I think a lot of people in the industry that weren't Bitcoin people had kind of given up on the idea that Bitcoin isn't just something that sits in your cold wallet and it's actually can be useful on chain. That view has been completely disproven wrong, I think, over the past year. Ordinals have spurred on a ton of activity on Bitcoin chain itself. At times flipping Ethereum and Solana and NFT volumes and stuff like that. Over the past year, Bitcoin has more fees than every other network except for Ethereum. So I think a lot of the industry has totally done a 180 on this. And it's wait a second, why did we get away from this idea that Bitcoin should be used in the on-chain economy and stuff like that? And how I'm kind of looking at it is that ordinals are Bitcoin's ICO moment. So if you think back to 2017 when Ethereum had their ICO craze, there was a lot of vaporware and stuff, but that spurred the first generation of, various apps like Balancer, Uniswap, Aave, stuff like that. So I think we're going to see this ordinal craze that happened maybe over the past year. It's going to start funding like Bitcoin development. And obviously Stacks is at the forefront of that. And we kind of touched about like Bitcoin is slow. It can get expensive. There's no smart contracts. Stacks can kind of solve that. Going through this, yeah. So hop in.
Can I add something to that too? Because I think it's an important point. So my high level like mental framework for this is that we'll see asset issuance happening on the Bitcoin L1, where it benefits from the full provenance of the Bitcoin main chain. And then trading will happen on the L2, where we can offer better user experiences, more expressive smart contracts, and faster transaction times. And so we're actually already starting to see a lot of teams that are building in this space that want to bridge not just Bitcoin onto Stacks, but also Runes and BRC20s and other assets. And from there, you can build things that just aren't really possible to do on the Bitcoin L1. It's really hard to do Bitcoin lending, trading, perp dexes on the L1 because of the long block times and the ways that Bitcoin price can fluctuate during that time period. And so being able to bridge these onto the L2, where you can have access to all of these user experience features, I think that's really where we're starting to see. And so that's one trend that I'm looking forward to seeing how that evolves.
Yeah. That was going to be my question to you, was that I love going on Bitcoin. I love trading the Bitcoin puppets, runes. I like rare sats and stuff like that, but I can't lie. It's not as smooth as, trading a meme coin on Solana or, borrowing and lending on Ethereum and something like that. How can Stacks get these assets that, exist on the L1, on the L2, maybe get like AMMs for runes and other BRC20 stuff like that? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, so I think Stacks basically has, it's very tightly integrated with Bitcoin, right? Like every Bitcoin transaction actually can trigger contracts on Stacks. Like Stacks contracts know exactly what's happening on Bitcoin, right? In some ways, Bitcoin is the master and decides like finality for Stacks as well. So it's very natural to take these assets that are defined on the L1 and sort of like take them to Stacks for like faster trading or something. But I think some people might even enjoy the experience of directly working with the L1, and that there will always be a use case for that. The thing that I think about is, right now we don't even have single digit millions of users trying to use these things on Bitcoin on a daily basis, right? So as we go more mainstream and we start to get like tens of millions of users, Bitcoin fees are just going to skyrocket like anything, right? So it just simply wouldn't be possible to pay such high fees on the L1. And I think that's where Stacks is likely going to shine the most, because Stacks doesn't need to be as decentralized as Bitcoin L1. Right? Bitcoin will always be Bitcoin, right? But Stacks can actually take a lot more network traffic and could be much faster. It could be more experimental, right? We can ship a new version of the L2 way faster than any improvements that would ever be made on the L1. So I think that's where I see the future, that as the gas fees keep going up, most of the traffic is going to spill over and go to the L2s, and we want to be ready at the L2 level to absorb that traffic.
Awesome. The next topic I want to talk about the Stacks ecosystem. Kind of alongside this ordinal craze, you also source DeFi TVL and other protocols building on Stacks takeoff. TVL is up 76% year to date. At times was over 100 million. You got DEXs and stuff. Also have the most active monthly developers of any L2. You have over 1,000 Bitcoin bridged. That's like third-party bridges, not SBTC. Want to make that clear. Generating $1 million in fees. What are the most interesting things going on in your ecosystem right now that you're paying attention to outside of, core to Stacks like the Nakamoto upgrade, SBTC, but rather maybe like third-party protocols building on top of Stacks?
Yeah, well, I, for one, I'm excited to see this chart hockey stick up to the right. I think that, when we look at SBTC, we have a goal of getting 10,000 BTC pegged in within the first year. And so with that, you can start to see that liquidity starting to flow its way into some of these other decentralized exchanges and lending protocols that are on Stacks. So I think some of the ones that you have listed here are great examples of that. Zest is a Bitcoin lending protocol that you can borrow against your SBTC in a really easy way. They're working on ways to basically make that process as frictionless as possible, so that you only have to interact with a L1 Bitcoin transaction, and they basically do all of the minting and the loans sort of under the hood, right? So a lot of it is like, how do we make interacting with the Bitcoin on L2s as frictionless as possible, and what does that user experience look like? That's one team that's doing a great job at that. I think same things with Bitflow. So Bitflow has developed a liquidity aggregator where they're pulling in Bitcoin exchange prices from Valar and Alex and others. And so I think they're really well positioned to be this liquidity hub for SBTC and other Bitcoin assets. I know they're also one of the teams that are working on the Runes AMM, which they've announced publicly. So I think those are two protocols that I'm definitely watching for, especially as SBTC comes to market.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a lot of exciting stuff happening, and there are builders, as you mentioned. Like one of the stats that I really like was there's 30% month over month growth in the number of smart contracts being deployed. That actually shows developer traction, right? Like people are deploying more and more smart contracts every month, and I think there's the critical mass of developers already there. I actually think the biggest bottleneck is the Nakamoto upgrade and SBDC launch, right? Because all of this is super interesting, but BTC capital is not really being deployed right now, right? Like people don't have good UX of using these applications right now because of Bitcoin 10 to 40-minute block times. So I think once we solve the UX issues, once we actually get Bitcoin liquidity going, that's where all the action starts, right? And that's the thing that I'm most excited about. Like even think about basic use cases. Like I don't know, people would remember, early days of the Liquid network, like 10 years ago when it was started. A lot of exchanges were interested in integrating it because they were like, I want to do fast transfers between, let's say, a Binance and a Coinbase. Like, why can't I do a Bitcoin transfer within a couple of seconds between two large exchanges? That's a big use case. Like market makers and other large movers were wanting to have that. And imagine it's been 10 years in Bitcoin's history, and we have never had a network over which you could actually do those large exchanges. And I think with the Nakamoto launch and SBDC, and by the way, this wouldn't work on Lightning. Lightning doesn't have liquidity or channels to be able to support such large transfers. So with SBDC, I think what you're going to start seeing is on-chain Bitcoin movement, even from large market makers and exchanges to DeFi players, and actually seeing like more on-chain BTC activity go up, which I think is a very, very big deal. It's still something that I think the market is mostly sleeping on it, right? Like it's $1 trillion in capital. Look, everyone's looking elsewhere. Everyone's looking at the activity on Solana or other ecosystems, and people aren't paying attention to basically the sleeping giant that is Bitcoin, and it's about to go on chain.
Yeah, that is a great way to put it. It's a sleeping giant, and it's kind of crazy that it gets slept on because like the whole industry is basically built on Bitcoin. This industry doesn't exist without Bitcoin. We have about 3.5 minutes left. This is an interactive panel, so I do want to open the floor up. If anyone had any questions they would like to ask. If not, I got a couple more questions queued up that we can go into. But if anyone's got anything they want to ask, feel free to.
Yeah, so I think let me repeat the question. So the question is about Coinbase BTC. I think it's a great thing actually that Coinbase did it, because they're going to bring more Bitcoin on chain, but in a more centralized way. But it will at least give users like a taste of like what they can do with Bitcoin on chain. And I almost think that there will be a big centralized winner. Like right now, WBTC is the biggest player with around 10 billion in Bitcoin issued. Coinbase might actually get there and become the largest centralized player. But there's a huge market for the biggest decentralized version of Bitcoin out there. And I think that's what we are trying to do with SBDC. Like it's an open network. We already have 20 plus institutions who are signers. Anyone can become a signer. You can become a signer, right? So that's the decentralized version of that to me is personally much more exciting. But I think the centralized versions do play a role, right? Like they do play a role in maybe like even expanding the market in some ways.
Yeah, just to build on that really quickly, I think we're in the stage right now where we really have to grow the pie for the entire Bitcoin ecosystem. So as of today, we're at probably around 12 billion TVL across all of Bitcoin. When you look at Wrap BTC, when you look at what's deployed on Stacks and other Bitcoin L2s, Bitcoin DeFi protocols, that is a tiny fraction of the overall addressable market, right? Just like a simple comparison is that Ethereum has $86 billion in TVL, DeFi TVL, despite being less than 4 times the size of Bitcoin's market cap. So, when I see new assets like Coinbase BTC coming online, it's a great way to help to bring more Bitcoin on chain, to Munib's point, and really start to activate that in DeFi, helping to grow the pie for the entire space.
Hey guys, I got two questions. The first is on slashing. So currently there's no slashing for signers. So how do you create a reward and penalization mechanism for people who
All right. So
participate
the,
to
so the question is about slashing the signers. So I think the way we have designed the system is that there are two type of penalties for the signers. One is that they 100% of their locked capital is held hostage until they do the right thing. So let's say if a signer is uh, not honoring withdrawals, they sort of like lose 100% of their capital. They can't unlock their capital. They can't access it anymore until they sign and process the withdrawals. And B, they lose their Bitcoin rewards. So it's like a negative penalty. Like instead of earning the rewards, you start losing them. But I think the bigger issue is actually the capital that is. So it's like I know some systems have like slashing, which is like you take away some capital. We'd rather operate for this is so important that you basically lose access to 100% of your capital until you do the right thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question, but unfortunately, we're out of time. If you have any other questions about Stacks, I guess the last part in where can people reach out to you? What's the best place to do that?
Yeah, so I think I'm pretty active on Twitter. It's just my first name, Muneeb, and I think Stacks is just Stacks on Twitter as well. And Andre,
Yeah, for me, you can follow me at Andre R. Serrano. I also write a regular blog post called Bitcoin Rights. So bitcoinrights.com, you can find me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Had a blast doing this, and hope you guys all enjoyed.
all right, thank you.